There we go. Well, let me do a few things here. Turn that off. We'll turn that off. You can't see it too far back in the distance. Maybe not. It's kind of odd. I can see, maybe it's poetic, right? There's a big half moon, quarter moon, whatever you want to call it. Right out there over the street lights down there that you can't really see on here either. Isn't that kind of a statement to the world that we live in, of how sometimes we can't see the moon for the street lights? Here we are, and what is a drive-through of a local chain called Scooters. They've got quite an interesting menu there, I think. I was gonna do a text response to Tim, one of Tim's comments that he made in general, and I'd made a comment to him in general about how how many he was amazed and awed of the new discoveries of more moons in the orbit around Jupiter or Saturn or whichever it was. And I says, how many more discoveries and of the unknown out there will our future progeny eventually get out there to see if we manage not to eradicate the planet as we know it. And then I debated about doing this live, and there's something a little bit more intimate about doing a live video, because I've yet to figure out how to transfer once it's on Facebook. I don't know how to capture it so I can transport it over to my YouTube channels. Those are kind of my would-be legacy. I don't have a lot to leave when I'm gone. Not like, some people, it's a matter of measure. We all have something to contribute while we're here, and we do our best. Sometimes we don't do our best. Sometimes we're conscious of that fact. A lot of times we're not conscious of the fact that we don't do our best. And he was pondering how different the world will be for his children when they grow up. And that got me thinking about my grandchildren, my granddaughter, and what the world will be like for her. And as I started to tell him in text that, I'm 50, going on 52 in September, and over half my life's gone, and that's the cold facts. And so much has changed. So much different stuff has changed. And this goes hand in hand with some contemplation I was having. As you know, I've been reviewing Twilight 2000. And this was created in the early 80s and mid 80s, late or early 90s, envisioning what the world would be like in another 20 years in their future if things went bad. And there was a lot of talk. By the time the mid 80s rolled around, most of us knew we weren't going to see World War III. There was always that chance, but it wasn't like it was in the 50s and 60s. Things have mellowed out a little bit. And at the end of the day, most of the would-be powers of the world, this is what makes places like Iran and North Korea so dangerous in the eyes of the rest of us, is because they haven't quite caught on to that yet. That they somehow seem to think that they'll have a limited war if they break loose with that. You turn that genie loose, and how much different the world would be. And so this is all kind of tied together. And going back to, like I said, I decided not to do a live. I want to do it so I can put it on my YouTube channel. Someday my grandkids will see it, and maybe not. I don't know. Some of my relatives, most of my relatives that mattered are gone. The rest of my extended family, well, they're out there, but they're doing their own thing. It's just Brenda, my wife, and I, and our children. Our daughter's got her own family and lives in the way south from here, and we see very little of them. And it is what it is, and that's part of life and the changes of life. And as a child, the world was completely different. It reminds me of a scene from Back to the Future. Just bear with me here, okay? I mean, a lot of you guys will flick on and flick off. You know what? You're entitled to it. All more power to you. You all think you're all that in a bag of chips. You're good people. But some of you people think a little bit too much of yourselves, in my opinion. But hey, I'm just a fat man. What do I know, right? I'm just a blowhard. But Back to the Future, there's a scene with Doc and Marty are looking around that mall. You know, not quite unlike this. Maybe not quite the same. But the Doc has this epiphany a little bit. He says, I remember when this was all cornfields as far as the eye could see. And that's not a cliche thing. That's not a cliche thing. This whole area here is what used to be the extreme far west side of Des Moines. And even then, for the most part, it was cornfields. Living History Farms up the street here on the corner was kind of out there. It was like you look it up, Google Living History Farms, and it'll tell you everything you want to know about it. But now, you go further west, the whole place out there is just booming. You know, I don't know if it's on the east side. There's huge Facebook computer centers being constructed one after another out between on the outskirts of Altoona, which is the neck of the woods where I ran around in my teens and stuff, in between Mitchellville and Des Moines. All that was cornfield. It's not cornfield. Out here now, Google kind of deal with this, that they're making all kinds of crazy stuff. I mean, they're going to invest goober amount of money, and the idea is going to be completely redefine this entire side of the city as they talk. This, as I know it, is completely redefined. What my grandkids, what Tim's kids are going to see, it just amazes me to think about it. You know, the millennials and the Gen Xers and stuff, they take for granted the things that Rob and I and many of you grew up with. You know, this hobby that we share, grew up with, right? The video industry, the video game industry, social media, the internet, none of that stuff existed when I was a child, when I was their age. It wasn't until I was in my late teens that the internet started to come around, and it was hideously expensive. Not everybody could afford to have it. And cell phones, come on, everybody knows about the brick, right? Now look what we got. We can't function without it. You look around, I was amazed that the local gas station I do gas at actually still has a payphone. I'll take a video of that someday. The fact that there's so few of them left. They used to be everywhere. They're not, now you can't ever find them. It's hard even, and you go into most places and ask to use their phone and they look at you funny. Our phone's hooked up to the computer. Yeah, we don't have a phone. Our landline is our computer. So, you don't have a cell phone? Gee, you can get one for $30. $30 and $10 a month to pay for it. It's unheard of, right? How much change? I looked at things as I'm reading through this Twilight 2000 stuff, and how different mindset was then compared to now, right? If the world was to suddenly break up into a nuclear holocaust and have a really big, nasty go for between us and whomever and what have you, and how much short of an extreme all-out exchange, if we do the limited exchange, which is implied in over a period of several years, which is implied in Twilight 2000, how radically different the world would be. Well, I want to take on just a second about that. In Twilight 2000, a lot of the second and third tactical strikes were targeted against refineries and communication centers for basically the glue that keeps civilization running and put together. It keeps people fed, keeps the world turning and everybody in communication. EMP blows up this, blah, blah, blah. It's going to be a little tougher to do that now, right? The power grid, The power grid in this country is a mess, but yet every day I'm ripping up and down the highways and the byways in this neck of the woods, and I pass by and I see a dozen wind generators, components for a dozen each day rolling through the town. They're going all over the place. I'm watching Australian outback truckers as my thing to view before I go to bed at night, and they're one of the guys down there was hauling one of these huge blades for a wind generator. There's a couple factories that used to produce Maytag place up in Newton. It's about a half hour, 40-minute drive east of here. They used to make washers and dryers and so forth. My best friend's dad worked there and retired from there. Now the place makes these big fiberglass blades for these wind generators, and another one somewhere nearby makes the towers. And here, everywhere I go in central Iowa, there's farms of them. So, in our neck of the woods, if things went south, the balloon went up, first off, EMP's not going to blanket the entire country. You'd have to be a staggering amount of bombs. And yes, I've heard the argument, one or two are properly placed in the atmosphere. Now, it's not quite the same, it's not quite as easy as that. And meanwhile, we have a lot of generators, so we would be somewhat self-sufficient when it comes to electricity in some parts of the state. And then there's the fuel issue. It takes a lot to keep these ugly things going that takes us to work and takes us home and does our running around and does all the little things we take for granted. You know that. I'm not preaching to a bunch of dummies. Y'all know that. Y'all smarter than me. And gas, right? Well, in Twilight 2000, a lot of vehicles, wherever possible, were converted over to run off of steam or methane or some version of alcohol. Well, in this state, lo and behold, the Corn Belt, we have a number of ethanol refineries, facilities that manufacture ethanol. And then there's scores of guys that went out and bought a bunch of stuff for doing biodiesel. My boss has a biodiesel still in a shed at the back of the shop. He paid crazy money for it a decade ago with some plan to turn used cooking oil that we otherwise dump at the waste treatment facility place and to fuel to run the trucks. And he never used it, right? So it's still sitting there. And hundreds of other guys just like him got these things squirreled away, or are still using them to some degree. So we don't have the 100% dependence that we did in the 80s. Things changed. It's just like our fuel. Now, we'd be more likely to run stuff. We could convert these things, we could convert this stuff to run off other things. The real problem where we still need oil is lubricants. Much harder to get a synthetic lubricant if you don't have a bunch of factories and the artificial material to manufacture. I'm just saying, right? And then, the installment Howling Wilderness for Twilight 2000 goes into great depth about explaining how the society itself basically falling apart. After the third or fourth year, the hunger crisis, humanity becomes very difficult to feed themselves. It's all about local farming and localized subsistence stuff because we run out of the gas, we've run out of the lubricants. We don't have the tractors in the fields. We don't have these huge, massive corporate farms running anymore. That's where we hurt, to some degree. And yet, like a lot of states, we got a whole slew of Amish folks hanging around. They still understand the old school, old world technology, and they'd be happy to teach people in need. So the opportunities there, we'd have to, we'd be setting time back. No question there. So if we were to try to create a Twilight 2000 version, Twilight 2050 or whatever, how different would that game system need to be to take into account all the changes in technology and social media and philosophy and mindset, right? And yet, there's always a but from the fat man, right? I'm a big guy, got a big butt. Got to bring up the butts. As I pointed out to Tim, there's always the downside of this stuff too. How many things haven't changed? How many things are still the same way? That this us against them mindset that we have against, we always have to, us Americans in general, our politicians, and certain percentages of our population seem to absolutely necessarily need a bad guy. Why do they have to be bad guys? I mean, they're misguided people. You know, they want to take a pot shot at us. Well, like I said, Toby Keith got it right. We're going to put a boot in your ass. That's the way we do things. That's the American way, and has been for a better part of 100 years now. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. And is Trump wrong from asking our allies to boot up a bit, pony up a bit more in the civil defense and the mutual defense force funds and so on and so forth? I don't think so. I don't think so. At the same time, we still ponying it up full bore, you know. And a couple years, a decade ago, the economy hurt pretty bad. Nowadays, the economy is doing good. At least in this side, this area, the freaking economy is outrageous. I don't know exactly what Iowa's done right in the past decade. It just astounds me just how big the differences are. And yet the same problems I see. There's a lot of homeless people. There's a lot of people struggling to make ends meet because, you know, minimum wage just doesn't cut the bill anymore. And the old adage, this argument, well, so many people, you know, the minimum wage was never intended to be a subsistence job. Really? No kidding. Really? You see that missing tooth? The hillbilly dumbass. And all. Yeah, really? And yet how many people have fall back on that? I'm just saying. You know, how many people work at places like this making well above minimum wage now, still way below the poverty, or way below what's considered acceptable wages? You know, the housing in this neck of the woods is horrible. The wife and I are just struggling to find a place that's suitable for what we want, and there just isn't anything out there unless you can afford $500,000 brand new house. It's just because there's so many people buying places and so few. It's cheaper to buy a house than it is to rent. Rent's crazy high. You know, it's 2-3 times what it was 20 years ago, and our wages aren't nearly that high. I'm just pointing out the obvious, right? The only reason the fat man's doing well is partly because I do a lot of overtime, and I'm grateful for it when it comes through. You know, sometimes I have to actually argue with my boss because he'll want me to work 7 days a week at drop of a hat, and some days I'll go run out and do that, and some days I don't. I can't. There's still life to deal with, so it is part of the life we deal with. So how better or different is it going to be for our kids? I don't know. Our grandkids? I don't know. I feel positive that humanity is savvy enough, maybe not smart enough or wise enough, you know, because there's too many of these guys out there. I deal with a lot of them. But we're savvy enough to know that we blow up everything, nobody wins, and everybody suffers. And most of us are die, and our grandkids and our kids suffer. Meanwhile, we can keep moving forward, and the answers are there. The great unknown discoveries are still ahead. What great and fantastic different things will our kids and grandkids experience in 30 years and 50 years when we're no longer here. It's just an awe-inspiring thing. You know, some food for thought from the fat man from 1:30 in the morning. Things, you know, seem to be going okie dokie. You know, I'm telling you, Tim, your kids have got a wonderful world ahead of them if we don't mess it up. And our parents did their best to keep from messing it up. They're still trying to fix some of that problems that their parents did. You know, the mindsets are changing. It's slow. And yet, some things have not changed for the better. Like I said in previous video, I was talking to Rob, there's far too many absolutes in this world. Too many absolutes. You're either do it my way or you're by the highway. And I see it sadly in some of our gaming companions, even a few people that follow the chain channels that I follow, and I noticed in their tones and their attitudes something's changed in their life, and not for the better. And somehow or another, it's all about an absolute for them. You know, it's kind of sad, right? But this too will pass. Things will get better. Things will get different. All right? How radical, for a moment, just think for a moment, how radically different does it has to be? Because when I was younger, the concept of instant communication, the ability actually for me to do a live video, my choice to do a live video in the middle of a parking lot at a Scooter's coffee shop in West Des Moines, well, technically Urbandale, Iowa, slash, I guess this is Clive. It's all these burgs kind of run together. It's all considered the greater Des Moines area, but each individual community wants to, clings to the past too. And so, none of this existed when I was a kid, but we envisioned it. Star Trek. Oh yeah, the communicators. Everything you can think of sci-fi. A lot of the stuff we got today is because of people thinking, I want that. And the internet, the idea that I can instantaneously watch a show on Australian truck drivers in the outback whenever I want, from my phone, from my laptop, from my TV. I don't even have words for it. And it just struggles to explain how different these things are. And I do that to my best ability when we do some of these videos that we do for our hobby. One of the things, and I'm clinging to some of the old school stuff for a good reason. There's a good foundation for it. And without that good solid foundation, everything you got today would be junk. It's the truth. Those games you love now, those systems you love now, your ability to create the game that you want, to write how you choose to play, use what you want, what you don't want, so on and so forth, all had to come from somebody like Gary Gygax and hundreds of others like him, including Frank Frey Jr. God bless you, Frank. And all the work and effort, collaborative, Mr. Bloat, who's continuing to carry the flag. God bless you too, sir. The fact of the matter is, we came from something. We're going someplace. Some of us are going to carry this a little part of the way, and we're going to lay it down, and our kids and our grandkids are going to pick up that burden and carry it further forward up the road. So, I don't know. That sounds like a good place to end. I'm about ready to go home to the RV, get me some sleep, a couple 3A jobs in the morning, and then debate whether or not I'm going camping this weekend, depending on whether or not the campground's full. And even at 1:30 in the morning, I get a message from my boss, which, yes, you gotta love this job. You gotta love this company. They're good people. They struggle. They struggle, but they're good people at the end of the day, and in their heart, and that's what matters. And that's what the majority of us are, and we try, right? I should have ended this 2 segues ago. There you go. There you have it. From the Fat Man. Game on.